No, I turned them on now. But I mean, but that's what it is that the Iraqis they're a fatalistic society. They have this belief that Allah has a plan for me. I'm going to die when I die. And so if you tell them for a year, put your bulletproof vest on, and they don't do it, but it's not that they don't understand you. It's that they don't care.
Yeah.
That's
why in combat we kill so many of them.
Yeah. But you know what else? I mean, because that was what the guys of the 501st or the 502nd, the new Band of Brothers. Today's Band of Brothers. They said they just couldn't understand it. What was wrong with these Iraqis? Why weren't they doing what we're telling them to do, and this and that? And it's like because they're different people.
Yeah.
They don't understand things the same way we do.
Standard deduction that would help pay for their health insurance. That's part one. Second part.
Peter Libby and I talked about Valerie's claim, or talked about Wilson and his wife.
The what?
That's a Republican machine.
What is?
They put out shit. McCain has a black baby.
Yeah.
Max Cleland's a coward. John Kerry's not really a war hero.
Yeah. The dirty politics, the dirty tactics. That's what you're referring to.
Yeah. Straight up.
And you're even including that they would throw their own people under the bus, or or into the line of fire.
When the administration was on the defensive about the war in Iraq, and it just started, weapons of mass destruction were being found, and Kathy Martin's testimony was sort of inside that battle in the vice president's office. What were the strategies that were going on? And she describes a very active and aggressive vice president. We've reported a little bit about this already last year, but she brought to life this vice president who was deputizing his chief aide, Libby, and others to get in there, stop the press from saying this. Here are some talking points that he dictated personally to his staff. What should they say to the press about Ambassador Joe Wilson and his claims that the intelligence was all wrong?
Well, Carol, we just have a minute, but you just raised what has gotten the most attention this week is this notion that we're getting an inside look at the Bush administration during that period. You're sitting in the courtroom every day. Do you sense that? Are you getting that kind of picture?
It's a wonderful question because it feels as though we're reliving the summer of 2003, but in a new and even more painful way.
Knowing what you know now.
By that I mean the defense and the prosecution are highlighting all of the rivalries and the bitter alliances and the strategizing within the administration over what to do about a war that wasn't going well and that didn't look, at least at first blush, like it had been properly justified.
All right, Carol Lenning, thanks again.
Thank you.
Now, do you feel that broadcast was biased in any way? Do you think that was a fair and accurate report?
Yeah.
You don't think that it was, painted?
Yeah.
Era that had only occurred in the South, that all Northerners were abolitionists. History tells another story, much of it now on view at the New York Historical Society in the exhibit New York Divided, Slavery and the Civil War. The exhibit showcases the contributions of more than 200 scholars, historians, and academics, and it continues through next September. James Oliver Horton, a professor of American Studies and History at George Washington University and historian emeritus at the Smithsonian, is this exhibit's chief historian. He joins me now. Welcome, Professor Horton.
Oh, thank you.
So it turns out that slavery was actually abolished in New York City in 1827, but it took many more decades for that to be real.
No, actually, the first gradual emancipation law went into effect for New York in 1799. Wow. That law said that a person born after the 4th of July in 1799 had to spend a number of years in slavery, and it differed depending upon whether you were male or female, but in the 20, 25 years in slavery. But then in 1827, again on the 4th of July, a law went into effect that said slavery is over. So as of the 4th of July, 1827, slavery was officially abolished in New York City and state.
So if it was abolished, if it was over many years before the Emancipation Proclamation, when people think of the end of slavery, what was the division in New York over slavery?
Well, of course,
people
slavery was
shuttle
ended
slaves
in
around?
New York State, but it was very much alive in the American South, and even in some what we think of today as northern states. Delaware, for example, had slavery well until after the Civil War. And the last 16 slaves in my home state of New Jersey were freed by the 13th Amendment in 1865. So that there were still some slaves scattered in various places in the North, but the stronghold of slavery was obviously the American South. Now, New York was involved in many ways with the South, but most importantly,
600 years ago, 700 years ago.
I mean, New York really provided much of the capital that made the plantation economy in the South possible. It not only bought the cotton, it loaned money for the growing of cotton. It handled the foreign distribution of cotton. It was very much involved in the cotton production.
And King Cotton was the big commodity at that time. It was like oil is today?
Absolutely. On the eve of the Civil War, the American South produced 7/8 of the world's cotton. And when we think about how powerful that made the South, because it was in control of this cotton economy, you realize in the 72 years between the election of George Washington and the election of Abraham Lincoln, 50 of those years sees a slaveholder as president of the United States. And for that whole period of time, there was never a person elected to a second term who was not a slaveholder. Gives you some idea of how powerful cotton and the Cotton South was.
So because of that, you're saying that even though slavery was abolished, the slave economy, as it was practiced in the docks of New York, flourished.
Absolutely. The slave economy, and as the slave economy affected New York's economy. Now, so you had a substantial proportion, especially the business interests in New York, focused on Southern plantation society. But at the same time, you had an important anti-slavery movement which was growing in New York. The foundation of that movement was the Free Black Society in New York, that is in New York City and in New York State. But there were a substantial number of white allies who were part of the anti-slavery movement, and this integrated movement in opposition to the institution of slavery was very important, and that's the thing which made New York a divided place, with anti-slavery on one side and pro-slavery on the other.
But the abolitionists were not necessarily welcomed or greeted particularly well in those decades.
Oh my goodness. To be an abolitionist, even in the North, could be taking your life in your hands.
You'd beat up.
The Tappan brothers, I'm talking about Lewis and Arthur Tappan, were very important business people in New York. Their firm was the forerunner of Don and Branch Street in New York. Their houses were attacked in several anti-abolitionist mobs that just thought the abolitionists had no business operating